Hey guys, welcome to Learn for Tricky. In the previous session, we talked about why Docker, what is container, why do we install Docker, right? Now, in this session, we are going to cover how to install Docker, what is Docker desktop, what is Docker engine, and we are going to see in different operating system what are the different way of installing Docker desktop and when to use Docker desktop, when not to use Docker desktop, what everything is going to cover in this video. Let's get started. So before jumping into the installation of Docker onto the google.com and looking into the documentation, etc. of the Docker to install stuff. So let's understand a few things first. So we can install Docker as Docker desktop. When we say we have to install Docker, okay. So install, what does it mean? It means that installation of Docker desktop, okay. So don't get confused like installation of Docker. What is this? So installation of Docker is nothing but installation of Docker desktop, or it can be a installation of Docker engine. Okay, either of them. Okay, plus Docker CLI. Okay, so any one of them. So installation of Docker desktop will already have those tooling along with as bundled within Docker desktop. So when we install Docker desktop on the operating system, whether it is Windows, Mac, or Linux, so it will have all this in Docker engine, CLI, Docker Compose, Kubernetes functionality, and UI interface along with it. So that will help us tweak some Docker configurations within the UI, and also a layer of VM on top of the operating system on which the Docker will be installed. Okay. Now, what's the difference between Docker engine and Docker desktop? So Docker engine itself is encapsulated, means it itself as comes bundled with the Docker desktop. Second, Docker engine, when we install Docker engine, it simply installs on top of operating system. Okay. So when we install Docker engine, operating system means like Linux if we have, and we are installing Docker engine with the help of apt repository, apt repository, then it installs directly on operating system, that is Linux. But if we install Docker desktop, then what happens? It will have a layer of virtual machine on top of the current operating system. It could be Windows, Mac, or even Linux, because recently in last year, May 2022, Docker desktop for Linux has been launched. So we can also use Docker desktop for Linux as well. So when we install Docker desktop on operating system, then by default Docker desktop will run virtual machine layer on top of the operating system, right? And on top of it, it will have the Docker engine. Okay, so this is the difference between installation of Docker desktop and installation of Docker engine explicitly, okay, on the operating system. So why this VM layer is needed? Because it is based on top of the Linux features, kernel, etc. So that's why VM is needed to actually abstract away the underlying Windows and Mac layer. So to keep the consistency, it brings in the VM for the Linux as well, along with some security and all fundamental stuffs baked in within this Docker desktop. So yeah, so let's get on the board on the Docker website and see what are the installation steps for Mac, Linux, or Windows operating system. Let's see how do we install Docker. We simply type in install Docker on the Google. Install Docker. Okay. So install Docker. It lands us install Docker. Okay, so it lands us on the install Docker engine by default as a start page. If you click on this, it gives us an instruction to install Docker engine, but our intention is to install Docker desktop on Linux or Mac or Windows operating system. This is the initial step. So you can simply go to the home and see download and install this tile. Click on this tile. You will see various options of installing the Docker desktop for Mac, Windows, and Linux. Okay, so based on your operating system, you can click on one of this tile, and let me walk you through each one of them explicitly. So let's click on this Docker desktop for Mac. So what it says, it shows us two different buttons. One is Docker desktop for Mac with Intel chip, and one with the Docker desktop for Mac with Apple Silicon. So what it means that previously, like the MacBook or etc. comes with Intel structure, Intel chips. So we need to understand, you need to know about your Mac and check whether your Mac is using Intel or Apple Silicon, or it says that M1 or M2, it means Apple Silicon chip. So if it says M1 and M2, you have to click on this button, otherwise this button for Intel 1. So follow this instruction. Down the line, you just have to follow this instruction. Make sure that you have the prerequisite available, like 4 GB of RAM, and then when we click on this, it will give us the DMG file. You just have to install that particular file and drag and drop to application folder, and then you have to accept some license agreement, etc., and subscription agreement, and then you can good to go. So yeah, so I will talk about this subscription agreement. Let's first finish up the installation part. Similarly, we can do the same thing with the Apple Silicon M1 M2 chip. Let's talk about the installation of the Docker desktop on the Windows. So there are two different way of installing again Docker desktop on Windows. The recommended approach says that WSL2 backend. So what it means, so Docker desktop for Windows, you can click on this button. It will let me click on this and show you what happens. Click on this button, it will download the exe file for you. Okay, so this is one way of installing the Docker desktop on Windows. The second is, if you have the WSL2 installed on your basically layer of Linux on top of the Windows with the help of WSL, then you can follow this instruction to install the Docker desktop on Windows. So yeah, and if let's talk about the Linux one. So we got the Linux one installed on Linux. So install Docker desktop on Linux. So this instruction, if you see important instruction, it says that if you already have Docker engine installed on your Linux system, like any of your flavor of Linux, because Docker desktop recently launched, like last year only. So if you install you already have Docker engine, and if you go to install Docker desktop, it says that whatever images or you have in your Docker engine, it could not be shared with Docker desktop because they have their files in two different locations. So make sure that you know about it and do the context switching, because when you install Docker desktop, so it automatically creates the Docker context desktop Linux. Basically it's a name given to that particular Docker desktop installation. So if you have to switch between these two, Docker engine and Docker desktop, you can make use of the Docker context command to switch between these two. But make sure that you know about that the images you installed via Docker desktop will not be shared with the existing Docker engine installation. Okay, so as you say, this line is many images and containers deployed on the Linux Docker engine are not available in the Docker desktop for Linux. Okay, so follow this instruction guidelines to install the Docker desktop on your operating system on the Linux one. Okay, you can click on the Ubuntu, Debian, and Fedora, and the guidelines are there. You are installing Docker desktop, but you also need to know a few things. That Docker desktop, when we install, it is actually a paid a subscription based system, a subscription based model. It is not open source completely. If you are doing if you are learning something new, if you are from you are in the college, or if you are learning Docker desktop, you are learning Docker, it's fine to use, it's free to use. But there is a restriction. If you go to the Docker the pricing and subscription of Docker desktop, then you get to see that for personal use, the Docker desktop is free, and when we have to use for the there is a restriction. Like if you are working on an organization, and organization has a startup organization which has now a revenue of $10 million more than, and it's working for commercial purpose, then you cannot install Docker desktop on the machines of the organizational machines, etc. Right? So if you go down the line, you get to see that, okay, what comes in the Docker desktop, which we use for the personal one. So it encapsulates the Docker engine, Docker CLI, Docker Compose, Kubernetes, all these things within the Docker desktop. But yeah, so make sure that you know about the restriction of the Docker desktop. If you are working for a client and they are working for the commercial purpose, not for the open source projects, etc., then make sure that you do not install Docker desktop. Instead, go for the open source solutioning like Podman desktop or Rancher desktop. That would be a good solution in that case. But having the Docker engine into the system will not be a problem. Okay, now let's go to the Docker engine installation. Docker engine, as I told earlier, like Docker engine we used to install in Linux because Docker desktop was not available. So Docker engine is basically comes with Docker D, which is a Docker daemon, which actually the main component of the Docker, which executes the commands and all those stuffs like running the images, storing, fetching the images, running the images as a container, etc., will be done by Docker Engine itself. So if you see that down the line, the instruction for installing Docker Engine, you will get to see that, okay, if I click on this Docker, if you can also see that install Docker Engine, still they are actually pointing us to Docker Desktop only, but make sure that you are targeting to the right link while installing Docker Engine. Okay, so for that you can click on any of these links, they are correct. Okay, so when we have installed Docker Engine on Ubuntu, you get to see that these are the components that get installed down the line. If you see, so that we are installing it with the help of apt repository. So this command is very important. From this command you get to see what are the components, what are the small tooling that get installed along with the Docker Engine. So one is Docker CE, which is the core component. Then we have a CLI. Then we have a container D, by which we run the containers, like container D, by which we fetch and install the images, etc. So, and then Docker Compose comes with it. So all these things are independently shown, because when we install Docker Engine, we install components along with it. Okay, but when we install Docker Desktop, automatically these components get installed, and you know about only Docker Desktop, and all these things are installed underlying that particular package. Okay, and then after installation, you can check whether the installation is correct or not. So let me show you how you can check that installation. I'm setting on Linux Debian based operating system, Linux flavor. So if you can check it with the help of Docker command. If you type in Docker version command, you will get to see, and since it is the daemon is not currently running, so it is showing us that, okay, cannot connect to the Docker daemon. Basically, when we type in this command, it is a command that tries to hit the Docker daemon. Since the Docker daemon is not running, so it's saying that, okay, cannot connect to the Docker daemon. So how do we start the Docker daemon? So when we install Docker Engine, when we install Docker Desktop, based on the operating system, it will get the service gets registered. So whenever you start the operating system, it will automatically get started. So you need to know that, okay, you need to manually stop those services to start the Docker automatically, so that you can figure it out. Okay, so whether it is starting automatically or not, accordingly you have to stop those services and manually configure it to start yourself. Like in case of Linux operating system, we have system D as a init process. So we have systemctl command to start or stop the Docker. So by which we can start or stop. So systemctl, you need to provide the sudo, because it is installed as a root user. Sudo systemctl start. You can check the status before starting. Sudo systemctl status Docker, and then you have to put in the password, and you will get to see that, okay, this is not running at all as of now. Now to start this service, what we have to do, let me clear this. What we have to do, sudo systemctl start Docker. Okay, so that way it will start the Docker. Now if you see the status, you will get that, okay, the Docker daemon is running. Okay, so that way you can, and if you have to configure it to start along with the operating system, whenever the operating system start, it automatically starts this Docker daemon. So in that case, what is the command you can type in? Sudo systemctl enable Docker. So in that way it will get started along with the start of the operating system. Otherwise, if you do not want to start it along with the operating system startup, so we have sudo systemctl disable Docker. So that way you can stop running the Docker when your system kickstart. Okay, so that's it in this video. Hope you understand the basic concept of installation of Docker in this video. So we'll come back with the new video about Docker architecture in the upcoming session. Thank you so much. And if you like this video, if you do not want to miss any upcoming videos in this series, do subscribe to our channel. Bye bye.